Not so reliable, maybe. Let's go and talk to our very special guest about this. Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University. Hello, good morning, my friend.
Hey, Jesse. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. So let's talk about this. Now, you have a crime scene technician who, under cross-examination, didn't seem to know a lot of the answers that he probably should have had if he's going to investigate this crime scene. Would you agree with the defense?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I would agree with them. Yeah. Simply, yes, I would. How's that?
I like that, but let's elaborate a little bit more. What are they trying to get at here?
Oh, what they're trying to establish here, Jesse, is they're trying to imply that he is not fully aware of the timeline in which this vehicle kind of passes through in its environment. You know, who has access to it, the location perhaps of the vehicle, where it's been kept. Was there a valet that entered and left and potentially came back? And what they're trying to get at here is that who had access to it? Could anyone have altered or disrupted the scene? And so, and keep in mind, as I've stated previously, this vehicle is, though it's on four wheels, it is in fact a crime scene.
So they seem to be making some good points, and these 360-degree photos of the crime scene, those are important to analyze, especially for the jury, right?
Yeah, it is, because, you know, it's like I teach my students, we're kind of historians, aren't we? You know, as crime scene investigators, we're capturing a moment in time that can never be revisited. So everything that we capture is going to go as a point of record relative to this event, this tragic event. So with these 360-degree photographs, you go from macro, which means a very broad view, to micro. And so you orient the people in the jury box who, you know, just as a reminder, they didn't have the benefit of being there in real time. You orient them to the space that you're talking about or the location that you're talking about. Yeah. And then you're going to kind of move inward from there. You know, you photograph them.
And what I love, Joseph, is how you break it down. That's why I love having you on here. You really break down this really complex study into something that we can understand. And I'm glad we have you on, because when we come back, we're going to listen a little bit more to the crime scene. Okay, let's talk about this crime scene technician with our very own special guest, a forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. We hear this conversation about GSR, gunshot residue, and it seems that the defense is implying this guy just doesn't know much about it when he should. Is there validity in that statement?
I think that what they're dancing around here, Jesse, if you reflect back, what they were saying earlier was that this fellow had collected samples, and then the defense was trying to go down the road, and those samples are in fact GSR residue samples. That's what they're trying to get at here. But then the defense went down the road of asking him about the distribution of the pattern. Now, this is something completely different, because what they're asking him, if he's had training in, is a range of fire, which is, you can tell a lot by the elements that are left behind, the unburned powder, for instance, and the distribution of this powder with the naked eye as to how far away the end of the muzzle was, say, for instance, from the back of that seat. But those are two different things, okay? What they're looking for here with GSR specifically is the presence of the elements that go into the compounds that make the propellant, which presses or pushes the round out of the weapon. Okay, that's the explosion.
Right.
You get two explosions, and then the first one and the second one is the trigger mechanism.
And Joseph, I hate to cut you off, because I know we want to get into that. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about the GSR. Stay tuned. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Now, before we go delve deeper into the case that we're covering, and that's the Tex McIver case, I want to update you about something that is happening across the nation, and it is a big, big situation. It is the disappearance of Molly Tibbetts. You know this one. It's constantly been in the news. Well, we have an update for you right now. At around 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there will be a press conference that we will live stream here on Law and Crime. And it will be the first time the reporters in over a week or in about a week have heard an update about this case. It's going to be talking about the latest update in the investigation into where she is, this young University of Iowa student who went missing after a jog. It's a really chilling case as details are coming forward about what might have happened to her and who is being investigated. So again, at around 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will live stream that press conference here, and we'll obviously discuss more about it. That is the Molly Tibbetts disappearance. Again, 4 p.m. Now, we'll switch gears here, and we'll go back to what we were talking about before our last break, and that was we're talking about the Claude Tex McIver case. I want to bring back in real quick Joseph Scott Morgan, because I didn't have a chance to fully address what we were talking about. You and I were talking about gunshot residue in the car and how that might affect this case. Remember, Claude McIver shot this woman in the back seat of a moving car, and the ability of what GSR has to do with this entire case. You were talking a little bit more about it, Joseph.
Yeah, one of the things that they're looking for here, Jesse, is the distribution of this residue that's left behind when the a weapon is discharged. And if we can show this real quick, I have with me, this is actually a live round of ammunition here. It's a 40 caliber hollow point bullet.
Let's show Joseph, yeah. Yeah,
there you go. Okay, just to kind of give folks at home the breakdown of this. In this particular area, okay, first off, we have the projectile itself, which is right here, that's seated into the casing. Right here is the casing, and contained behind this is the actual propellant. This is where the main explosion takes place to drive the bullet down the down the barrel. But back here, we're going to rotate this around. You take a look, and on the back side, we have the primer. When this is struck, this initiates the blast that pushes this down the chamber. These are two different chemical compounds, Jesse. We have primer residue, we have propellant residue. So one of the things that they're looking for in this particular case is positionality, how this is distributed. When the primer is tapped off, and we've discussed online the nature of this weapon that was used, that's going to blow back on to the individual's hand. That gives us an indication if they were in fact holding the weapon or not. The primer residue, that's completely different than the propellant residue that's driving the projectile down the barrel. So this gives us an idea of the nature and position of both the individual that fired the weapon, the environment that they're in, and also the individual that was the recipient of the gunshot wound. In this case, this lady was essentially protected from the residue itself by this barrier of the seat that this round had to travel through. And of course, that's always been a bone of contention.
And I've got to ask you the million-dollar question, Joseph, but I might ask you after we play this testimony. So I'll give you some time to think about this when we come back. Okay. Can we tell from this GSR whether or not the gun was held this way or whether the gun was held this way? Because the defense will want to say it was in the lap of Mr. McIver, while the prosecution will say that he pointed it straight in the back seat and fired. So let's preview that, and we'll talk about it in a minute, Joseph. In the meantime, what we're going to talk about right now is Jay Grover. And Jay Grover is somebody who worked with the victim, Diane McIver. What was she like? Let's find out. Okay, that's a great witness right there. First of all, describing what Diane McIver was like, and you hear she was a very shrewd businesswoman, and you also hear what the moments of what Tex McIver explained to him about what happened to Diane. Two key points. Want to bring back in Joseph Scott Morgan, though. We were talking about GSR. We were talking about whether or not we can tell if the gun could be held from this angle or from this angle based upon GSR. What do you think?
Well, I think that the distribution of what we were talking about was powder distribution relative to like the primer. Remember, it blows back. If he's holding this in his lap, I don't know that it will make a big difference relative to positionality. I think that significantly, one of the things that we could think about perhaps, Jesse, is was the weapon rotated upward? If it was rotated upward, it would seem to me that he would have more powder distribution on the lower portion of his shirt and his abdomen, okay?
Right.
As opposed to laying flush on his lap, where you would have a higher concentration there. One of the ways that they kind of do this, in case folks at home don't know, when they use, say, an electron scanning microscope, one of the things they do is count the number of particles that are left behind distributed over an area. And of course, the higher the concentration, the more likelihood with primer that the individual would have had close, intimate contact with it.
And this is an interesting scenario because we know he's the shooter. We're trying to understand the nature of the shooting, and maybe we'll have a better understanding after this short break. We'll be right back. Pretty interesting stuff trying to understand the behavior of the defendant after he shot and killed his wife. But I want to go back to Joseph Scott Morgan to talk more about the logistics of how this happened. So she was shot in the back. We'll learn later on the angle and the trajectory of the bullet, but what do you think about the way she was killed?
It's if this is an out-and-out assassination attempt, it's one of the most bizarre that I've come across in my career. And if you're talking about level of lethality, he was markedly lucky. If that's what his intent was here.
What do you mean by that? Lucky?
Well, it's just an odd position, isn't it, Jesse? He didn't. If his intent was to kill someone, to do fatal harm to her, I can think of a lot of other locations that you would aim for in order to kill her. Let's keep in mind as well that this guy, he wasn't a novice with firearms. You know, there were reports over and over and over again about him actually teaching people to fire weapons out in Putnam County, Georgia, where they resided. It's not like he just happened onto a weapon and, wow, gee, how does this work? And then, you know, you've got this bizarre set of circumstances where he's riding in the back of the seat, weapons allegedly in his lap, weapon spontaneously discharges, and then travels at this odd angle through the back of the seat, through all of the structural interiors of the seat, and happens to strike her in a lethal area where she winds up bleeding out. It's just kind of it's an odd thing. You know, you would think that if he was going to attempt to fire and kill her, why not take the weapon and place it to the rear of the seat, approximating where her shoulder blades are, for instance, where you're going to get into vital areas like the heart and the lungs and this sort of thing.
It's interesting that you say that because that became a discussion during the case. Is this guy a mastermind that he thought, you know what, I know that they'll think the trajectory would come that way if I pointed it this way, so why don't I keep it on my lap, point it upwards, and I'll fire, and when the technicians come on, they'll say, hey, it looks like an accident. Is that a stretch?
Yeah, for me, intellectually, I don't know if I could go through those gymnastics, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's within the realm of possibility. But if you're looking to do away with someone, this is certainly in your, well versed in firearms. This is not a lethal area to strike somebody in with a projectile. Of course, the outcome. If this is a scenario that people want to go down this road, it wound up accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish. But it was he was really rolling the dice here if that was his specific intent.
Right. Now, we have about 40 seconds left, Joseph. So real quick, one of the things he says is there was a dangerous area that they were driving in. You've been there before. Is it a dangerous area?
Yeah, it can be. Atlanta is not known for homicides. Some people would beg to differ, but it's really not. It's known for a lot of thefts, carjackings, and this sort of thing. So yeah, there's an awareness there. This particular area that they're in, it's very tight, congested area during the day. Of course, at night, it's almost like a ghost town. But yeah, you've got any number of people. He put forth this idea that it was some homeless person or something like this that had perpetrated this crime. Who knows? I've worked cases there when I was with the medical examiner's office in Atlanta.
Yeah, that becomes a key factor in this case, and we'll talk more about it. But when we come back, we're talking about Shayna Hubers. And And welcome back, everybody. You know, here on Law and Crime, we cover some of the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. And you know what? That is why we are going to be covering, as best as we possibly can, the Shayna Hubers retrial. And I say the best we possibly can because as of right now, cameras are not allowed in that courtroom. But don't worry. We sent our very own Aaron Keller down there. He's going to be in the courthouse reporting back to us multiple times during the day. We're going to have articles written about it, and we're going to talk about this bizarre case out of Kentucky. This woman was already charged and convicted in the shooting death of her former boyfriend, Ryan Poston, a 29-year-old individual. She shot him multiple times. She was convicted, sentenced to 40 years in prison. She is now getting a retrial because one of the jurors on her previous jury was a convicted felon and didn't disclose that fact in the jury questionnaire. That's grounds for a mistrial, ladies and gentlemen. So now we're going to cover the retrial. This case has been in the news constantly. It's been covered on a lot of different media outlets, and we're going to talk about it here. Now, what I want to play for you in anticipation of this case is when the defendant, Miss Hubers, provided a jailhouse interview talking about her retrial and things of that nature. And let's not forget, she was just married in prison. She just got married in prison. This is a very interesting case. There's a lot of different angles. She is claiming self-defense, that her boyfriend was an attacker and she was simply trying to protect herself. When you also see her in other interviews and talking with police and comments that she's made, that seems that she wanted to kill her boyfriend on other occasions, that she's happy that he's dead. And she actually said on one occasion that when she shot him in the face, she finally gave him the nose job that he always wanted, claiming that he was very vain. Let's play you some of her jailhouse interview right now.
You've changed. So how have you changed? How are you different than October 2012?
I think I've grown up a lot, and I think I've been through a lot, and I think I was a young girl then, and I think I'm a woman now, and I think that...
Do you think you would handle situations differently now then?
Yeah, I think I would handle things differently now as a 27-year-old than I did as a 21-year-old.
Pretty interesting stuff, if you ask me. Let's talk to Joseph Scott Morgan a little bit more about this. Joseph, let's talk about the crime scene, okay? Was there evidence of a struggle that she claims that she was trying to ward off her attacker, her ex-boyfriend, Ryan Poston?
No, not particularly.
Okay, next question. When you look at that, what is missing from that crime scene? Why is there more than meets the eye?
Well, you know, this idea that she was in a fight for her life and all these sorts of things. And one of the interesting things, you know, going back to the comment about the nose job that he always wanted, there is something that we put forward in death investigation that's referred to as overkill, where you have gone out to really do great harm to someone. Not that shooting them is not great harm, but you go over and beyond force that's necessary. And the fact that she made the statement about this disfigurement that she caused on this young man, you know, a lot of people have talked about this kind of ripping away the facial characteristics of people in these heated environments. Anytime that I ever worked a case where I had someone, particularly with sharp-edged weapons, where they carve somebody up, it almost goes to, you know, no one else can have you. You're not as pretty as you think that you are, that I can kind of destroy you. You know, I think that you got a little bit of that at work here. You know, and you couple that with this other evidence. I think one of the particularly compelling things about this case is that infamous text that she sent out prior to this young man's death, where, you know, she had, you know, was kind of lyrically talking about how she wishes that he was dead, or that she would like to kill him. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but, you know, and that should send a chill up and down your spine.
Oh, absolutely. And she sent that text a week, maybe two, before she ultimately shot him. And that is not going to be good when a new jury is seated. And they're in jury selection right now. We're expecting opening statements this week. And as soon as we have it, we'll make sure to let you know. So, Joseph, thank you very much for your perspective on that one. But we're going to switch gears and now go back to the Claude Tex McIver case. This one, not claiming self-defense, but claiming it was an accident when he shot and killed his wife from the backseat of a moving car. Right now, I'm going to play the testimony of Bill Crane. This is one of the defendant's friends who he hired to try to be a crisis management consultant for him. Not a crisis management consultant, but he's involved in PR. And that became a big issue because Mr. McIver made some very questionable statements after he shot his wife, considering that he said that there was a Black Lives Matter protesters outside of his car, which is why he retrieved the gun. That did not become a very popular statement for him to make. Let's play the testimony of Bill Crane, who we interviewed here on Law and Crime about his reaction to this case, but maybe we'll play that for you at a later date. But let's play you Bill Crane's testimony from the case right now. Okay, so one of the big parts of Bill Crane's testimony is that Black Lives Matter statement and how they were trying to massage that a little bit in the media eye. But I want to talk a little bit about the hospital, which we touched upon. So let's bring back on Joseph Scott Morgan to talk about that. Now, you know about these hospitals. Did he really bring her to the least inconvenient hospital?
No. No, he didn't. Considering where they were, it would have been, in my estimation, and considering also that he knows Atlanta so well, which he does, he works down there, Grady Hospital, which is renowned as a trauma center. As a matter of fact, it has the highest level of ranking in that area to treat people. It was so much closer than traipsing all the way out to Emory Hospital. And again, you know, this is in the heat of the moment. They're probably thinking about care. He mentioned, you know, this gentleman threw out the term cardiac care, and yeah, if I had a cardiac problem, I'd probably want to go to Emory. But if I got a gunshot wound, you're damn straight, I'm going to want to go to Grady. If I've got a cut, a laceration, an amputation, anything, you talk to any cop, firefighter, anybody in Atlanta that has grievous trauma, they're going to want to go to Grady. They treat gunshot wounds all the time. So it seems to me it would have been better to have gone over to Grady at that point in time.
And that became a huge talking point
yeah,
for the prosecution. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Yeah, I agree with you. We're going to talk about it more after this break, so stay tuned. We'll be back with Joseph. Man, trying to analyze what was said after the shooting becomes a very special task, and that is what the prosecution has been doing there in the Tex McIver case. Let's bring back in Joseph Scott Morgan. I want to talk about the gun. Now, there's going to be a conversation probably later on, our viewers probably heard some of it already, whether the gun was in single action or dual action mode. It becomes a big point because was there a hair trigger or not? What do you think?
Hard to say. I doubt that. From what I understand, if you try to fire this thing in double action mode, it was kind of difficult. And when I say double action, that means that if you pull the trigger back to actuate the weapon, it takes X number of pounds pressure in order to make the firing pin go forward, or the hammer go forward. If you take a look at this image that we have here, that kind of humped back, there is a trigger or a hammer housing in there that pulls it where you can actually see the top of the hammer, and you can actuate it with your thumb. You can pull the top part of it back, and it would require less pressure in that mode, which is single action, to pull the trigger to actuate the thing. Let's keep in mind, he said that he was scared driving down the road. He had retrieved the weapon. He had it sitting in his lap. My question is, had he already engaged the hammer, that is, pulled it back to the cocked position, and then when they hit the bump, as they refer to it, his finger taps the trigger and initiates the firing sequence.
Yeah. And Joseph, I hate to do this again. You get right into it. I have to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll get right to it. Stay tuned, everybody. Everybody, so we are talking about the Tex McIver case. That was Billy Corey, somebody that knew the defendant and, more importantly, the victim so well. Almost you feel as if a family member of his passed away. That's what it feels like. I want to bring back in Joseph Scott Morgan to talk a little bit more about the actual shooting. And there are so many different components of the actual shooting. And we can't forget about what the defendant keeps saying, that he was startled, that he fell asleep and was woken up and the gun accidentally went off. After reviewing the facts of the case and after looking at what was presented in the crime scene, is there anything consistent with that narrative?
I think that for me, the only thing that could have initiated this thing, again, I go back to this idea that he had this weapon cocked. That is, the hammer all the way back, and if he was startled, he would have tapped the trigger. It could have gone off in that manner. If not, I don't see how else this thing could have just spontaneously fired. We're talking about, Jesse, a revolver here. This isn't like some kind of semi-automatic weapon. Mm-hmm. This is what we refer to in old terms as a wheel gun. That is, that the cylinder rotates. It requires a considerable amount of force to initiate this action. So him being startled, maybe that's on the radar here, but it seems a bit far-fetched to me.
Yeah, I mean, look, hey, he said, listen, the gun was cocked and it was in my hands because I thought there was a danger from outside. I still find it peculiar that somebody would fall asleep while holding a loaded weapon.
Yeah, I do too. And also with this guy's familiarity with weapons, Jesse, he should have known better if he is the so-called, semi-pro expert or whatever he is relative to weapons. You know better than to ride around with the hammer back on a weapon. That's a complete no-go in the world in which we live. You want this thing. You've already got the weapon in hand. What's the purpose?
It's so interesting because I also can look at it from the other perspective and say, oh, you know what? He says he's such an expert. I got this. I can fall asleep with a loaded weapon in my hand. Not a big deal. But a lot to talk about here. We have to take a break. We'll be back. Stay tuned. We can't forget that there is a human aspect to every story, including this story. And you hear the death of Diane McIver, the impact that it had on so many people in her life, including her mentor, Billy Corey. And you saw him getting emotional in the end, and that's just the start of it. We have a lot more today and a lot more to cover in this case. Now, I want to bring back in, one more time, Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, to talk about some follow-up questions. First question for you is, studying the behavior, the actions, the comments of a defendant. Here we're talking about Tex McIver. After a crime, after the shooting, how important is that for you as an investigator in your analysis?
Well, it begins to put the pieces all together in this huge mosaic, that we create as an investigator to try to tell the tale of what exactly happened. In the first place, we'll be looking at these individuals as witnesses and then kind of working our way down the list. And that initial contact that an investigator has with someone like a Tex McIver is going to put both, from an analysis standpoint, will put the investigators on a particular path that they will begin to walk down. Now, this doesn't mean that they've convicted the guy prior to that, but intellectually it's going to give us an idea of which direction to go in, Jesse, with the rest of the investigation. And dependent upon how the investigators view this information that they initially receive and how they process it in their own minds, goes to the nature of the case. What's going to be the outcome at the end of the day. So that initial contact is so paramount in a case like this. And
we talk about path. It was either an accident or an intentional murder, and that became such an interesting scenario later on when the defense was able to bring out their own reconstruction expert to talk about how this shooting went down. So I want to ask you about reconstructing the crime scene and the shooting. What goes into that?
Yeah, let's keep in mind this was not a whodunit, was it, Jesse?
It was not.
This was something that we knew who the actors were at this point in time. Reconstructing a crime scene, again, we're going back to try to repaint this moment in time, right. And you have to do this as accurately as possible. One of the big questions I have and continue to have with the McIver case, and I think that it might be part of the grounds for an appeal that might be set up at some point in time, is the security of this vehicle. Remember, we've already talked about the vehicle as a mobile crime scene. How many people came in contact with this thing How long did it take to get this thing analyzed? Who had access to this environment? The young crime scene investigator that was on the stand, he really didn't know how the vehicle wound up at the location. Was it towed in there? Could it be implied that someone had physically driven it there?
Right.
And that again, this raises this specter, relative to the viability of the information that was gleaned.
Okay, I know we have about 10 to 20 seconds left, so I have one more question. Do you think the police, there was a faulty part of their investigation?
I think in a sense that, you have to have the appearance of being above reproach. And these are very basic things like Lecard's principle. Every contact leaves a trace. You have to be fully aware of that at all times because, yes, Diane is passed on, but we're also talking about Tex McIver's future here and his life. And that has to be paramount in our thoughts.
Very well said. Joseph Scott Morgan, always a pleasure having you on, and thank you as always for your great analysis.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everybody, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be signing off. Bob Bianchi's coming on, and he's going to guide you through the next chapter. Stay tuned.